We were the enemy, and we could endanger those people enormously. The secret police, we used to wait at the metro station after every one of our receptions. But what we did was to invite the best American writers, painters, name drops, I mean, Edward Albee, Bill Styron, Arthur Miller, John Updike, Richard Diemenkorn, to come to Czechoslovakia and meet with their counterparts and their translators who were in fact the dissidents, not the communists in the government. We had to see the communists in the government because we were accredited to that government, but we did both. And that created trust. And the trust, when Czechoslovakia became free and the Velvet Revolution happened, and Bill and I gave Václav Havel his inaugural dinner the night before he was, before he became president. He was with his bodyguards, who were two guys in blue jeans with black leather jackets and ponytails. And when we watched this transition in Czechoslovakia, it was a Slovak, Jan Čarnogórsky, who had just gotten out of jail because he was a dissident, who was deputy prime minister, who asked me if we would help to write the Constitution and the Bill of Rights of free Czechoslovakia. And I said, Jan, I'm not even a lawyer. How am I supposed to write the Constitution? But we had taken Lloyd Cutler, former White House counsel to Jimmy Carter and subsequently to Clinton, to Czechoslovakia, to Prague in the summer of '89, and we'd taken him to Havel's chalupa, his house in the country, and with the secret police following us behind. And Lloyd had said, look, Václav, I'll do whatever I can for you. So that, we turned to Lloyd. I called Lloyd and said, how would you like to write the Constitution of Czechoslovakia? And he said, I'd love to do that. I married him to a man named Herman Schwartz at AU Law School. And they brought the experience, and this goes right to what you were talking about, Roger, they brought the experience of all the major parliamentary jurists from every parliamentary country in Europe to the commission in the Parliament of Czechoslovakia who were drafting the Constitution. And that allowed those people to choose what they wanted out of that and have a human being who consistently was at the other end of a telephone for them to be able to ask the questions. They chose the United States Bill of Rights, but it was this group of people. We did the same thing in Slovakia when it became a country. And the one thing you did leave out, Roger, is that it's a new country. So that in 1993, they had to start doing everything for themselves, and the financial situation was not great. So immediately in January, we started the Foundation for a Civil Society. It was actually then Charter 77 Foundation New York, because we picked up the charter from what George Soros had been doing. But the bottom line was we were trusted. They trusted me, they trusted Bill, they knew that we had been there for them in the dark days, and so we already were halfway down the path when we started. The second thing was, don't hire any old Americans. Hire young Americans, and mainly hire Czechs and Slovaks. We did not have an office in Bratislava at that point. We started an office in Bratislava the day it became a country. But at that point, it was the young people with the skills that they had who would not intimidate all of the people over 40 whom we could not hire in Czechoslovakia because their brain cells were already half destroyed by communism. And I'm very sure, I mean, I could tell you stories for 100 years, but I'm not going to, about the fact of why people say it's going to take 2 generations. It will and does take 2 generations for 40 years of that kind of oppression takes place, where you keep your head down at all times. Fast forward, head down. We were all at I'll tell the story. A young woman named Carrie Slees, who you'll probably meet tonight, came to visit, to be interviewed me when I was on the National Council on the Arts, and we were at the Hay Adams Hotel, and I said, I want to open an office in Bratislava. And she said, yeah, and I talked to her for about 40 minutes, and she walked out the door with $1,000 of cash, and she went and opened an office. So that's the second sort of lesson, is that people in these countries, whether it's Egypt, Tunisia, Slovakia, the Czech Republic, are capable people who, if you delegate and give them the sense that they can do it, then that's the most important lesson, that we Americans do not have the right to tell people what to do in transitional societies. So, and as Lenka said when she came to say congratulations at one point, she came up from Slovakia after they'd become independent NGOs, and she said, Wendy, she never talked about how many proposals we wrote or how much money we raised. She said, Wendy just said, go do it. And that's an important lesson for anybody, and that's what the Peace Corps volunteers did, because they did not try to impose themselves on people. They knew from their training that they were there to help, but not to tell people what to do. The story of Rock the Vote. And we're going to get Mike to tell his side of it in the next panel. But basically, Mečiar was there. All of the opposition people were sitting around drinking coffee in cafes in Bratislava going, we can't do it. We'll never, you know, he's got 35% of the vote. He's got all the old ladies in the villages. We'll never defeat him. And we all went to a Grant Makers East meeting in Brussels. We were sitting at a round table, and we said, we've got to do something. And that was, I think, late November. And 2 weeks later, we had all the funders, Slovaks, Demes, Butera, all of them, and Hungarians, I mean Romanians and Bulgarians who had done their own revolution, around a table, and we said, what are you going to do about this? I mean, we can't do it. We're not only funded by private foundations, but we also, it's up to you. And everybody went like this. And then they went back home again and they said, whoa, wait a minute, this is embarrassing. We've got to be able to do something. And then they all pulled themselves together. The Slovak office of the Foundation for a Civil Society was the headquarters for the vote. But the magic of all of this was, the problem was, and then the magic was, the problem was that we could not engage in political activity. We were funded by public foundations and AID and NED, and we couldn't possibly, so it had to be educational, it had to be get out the vote. Okay, so what happens? A Peace Corps volunteer named Michael Hochleiter, who was sitting right here, was seconded to the Foundation for a Civil Society, Bratislava, and he brought the idea of MTV, Rock the Vote. And I'm going to let him and Lenka tell you about all the double and triple meanings of Rock Volieb and the symbol of the hand. But all of the public media was controlled by Mečiar. And therefore, public service announcements and anything like that just couldn't happen. So Mike arranged for an interview with the MTV anchor about Rock the Vote. And they had the tape of it. And so in the movie theaters, which were privatized, they would put on the interview about Rock the Vote and about young people and about concerts and bike rides and bus trips and everything else getting out the vote. And then underneath it was the tagline saying, do you want to join Europe? Well, of course, every young person wanted to join Europe. And so in order to join Europe, they had to vote. And the rest is history. Mečiar was a populist, and he was a wily but dumb populist at the same time. He was so caught inside of his own box and his own pugilist sort of stubbornness that he didn't get it, that the NGO sector, the young people in this country, the volunteers that were there were going to be his demise. He never thought that he was going to lose because he was so controlled. So that's the story of Rock the Vote, and there's a lot more tales to be told about that. The second part of it is the Foundation for a Civil Society in Prague and in Bratislava never intended to stick around as an American organization. These were branch offices of a New York NGO, non-endowed, never wanted to be endowed. Lenka worked with me in New York and worked with us for 7.5 years, but at the end of the 90s, they spun off. They both became incredibly successful in their own right, And that's the second part. And this is what needs to be known in the U.S. government. Let go. Let them do it for themselves. Don't be risk adverse. I mean, these are risks that everybody had to take, and this is, frankly, the problem with government funding. We all know what the problems are. Governments, Congress, oversight, accountability, et cetera, et cetera. So the private foundations in this country have to be encouraged in this new Arab Spring to be partners. I know that's what you're working on, to be partners, because you can't count on U.S. government money not to be risk adverse. It's just the nature of the beast. So on that sort of point, I will stop, but it is about trust. It's about just go and do it. Just ask, and failure's okay. And if everybody can pass that on and use, as you said, I mean, the most important thing is for the Slovaks, the Czechs, the people in the northern tier to be the people that work with the Arab Springs, and that the young people from those countries are funded to come and job shadow and be interns and stick around for a while in these countries in transition, because they will then begin to see how you live on the economy, how you aren't on the dole all the time, how you raise your own money, how you organize yourself, how you create a board. All of the things that they have done so successfully needs to be done by experientially, not some academic sitting in the corner with an easel. So those are all my biases.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Now what we'd like to do is have a discussion. We're free to give comments. The audience is free to give comments, to ask a question. We have a microphone somewhere. Who's got the microphone? Oh, we have microphones in the back, but I'd like to actually start the conversation out with Ambassador Ted Russell. I know that you have a comment or two and perhaps a question. So we have a traveling mic, I think. That might be the easiest way. You can be next.
Live?
Yes.
Okay. Having had the pleasure of being in the area for the Prague Spring and then the Velvet Revolution and then in Slovakia, I'm always moved and delighted to hear the story of the transformation of Slovakia into a very successful democracy. And what strikes me, an issue which I think we're going to run into in helping other countries to be this successful, involves the fact that the Slovak transition, I think, is a beacon for NGOs and those who want to bring about transformation to a civil society, but it is a warning to autocrats. And I would have to differ a little bit with Wendy's interpretation of Mr. Mechar, who I agree was a strategic dum-dum, but a tactical genius.
That's why I called him Wiley.
Right. And he knew that this was not good when we were helping the NGOs. In fact, when we switched a good portion of our budget, and Lenka will remember this, we switched from helping to evaluate companies for privatization because we knew his people were simply going to steal them. We switched it all to helping NGOs. And Metro was extremely displeased with this, and we were attacked in the party press for interfering in Slovak internal affairs. So I think autocrats were taking a lesson from what was going on. And I was struck when Secretary Clinton described the need to sometimes engage in non-sanctioned help to NGOs, or helping NGOs which are not sanctioned by their governments in developing civil society. And I would submit the reason that Mr. Mechar did not throttle the First Lady on that occasion that you mentioned was because Slovakia had subscribed to the goal of joining transatlantic organizations, NATO and the EU and the OECD. In other words, I could go to Metro and say, you said you wanted to join these clubs, therefore, you know, you got to shape up. I didn't put it quite that way. But this would work because Slovakia had subscribed to certain goals. So countries that haven't subscribed to these goals, I think, present a bit more of a problem. So I'd like to hear a little bit more from some of the panelists how you deal with situations where, unlike Slovakia, which really, really had a goal and wanted to rejoin a community where democracy was the norm, what do you do in countries, I don't know, like Belarus, where this isn't the case? But that's kind of a question and an observation.
Who would like to take that?
Maybe I can start. I do agree with you that there are different types of autocratic governments, some more willing to reform than others. Moldova is closer to the way Slovakia was in the 90s than it is to Mr. Lukashenko's Belarus today. But what was interesting for me about the Slovak example throughout the 90s is how innovative it was. And that's what we need to keep on doing, is building this innovation. This model or these ways of doing this work are continually changing. And we've seen the role that new media is playing today, the role of the internet. All of this helps civil society even the playing field in some respects. Certainly it isn't always going to be easy, or it isn't going to work the first time. We remember it took a couple of elections and a referendum in Slovakia to reach 1998. And certainly it's going to take a little bit longer than that in Belarus. But the idea of constantly innovating and helping civil society to at least be on a little bit more even playing field is something that we learned from the Slovak example and try to apply in every one of these situations, including Egypt, Tunisia.
Just one point along those lines, building on what Roger was saying. In many respects, the transitions that will take place over the next few years in North Africa are going to be more challenging than what occurred in Central and Eastern Europe. We don't have the prospect of European Union membership, for example. But we do have a whole host of other tools that weren't available in 1989, and we have a tremendous amount of experience that wasn't available in 1989. So one of the things that we are doing with governments across the region is identifying individuals and organizations that can serve as senior democracy mentors, and using an online platform that's administered by the Secretariat of the Community of Democracies, we can then connect those mentors who have the experience that's required to run an NGO in the midst of a transition, or to run for parliament, or to run a town, whatever it is, with individuals in North Africa and the Middle East who are encountering similar challenges and need to draw on that experience. And we can do that in real time. It's very inexpensive and allows us to take advantage of the lessons of these transitions. So that's just one example of how I think we are, in some ways, better positioned to deal with the challenges that we're going to encounter going forward. But we need to, as Roger was saying, be incredibly innovative in how we bring that expertise and these new tools to bear as we encounter the challenges of the next wave of transitions.
I would just add to what I was saying, and to mirror what Tamika says, that also back when Wendy was describing those first years, there were only a handful of groups or donors doing this type of work. And today, we have not only private foundations, but we have governments, we have partners like the government of Slovakia. We have an international environment where Lithuania is the head of the OSCE, where Slovakia is heading the Visegrad 4, where Poland will handle the presidency of the EU. In other words, we have friends and partners that can help us in this effort, and it's really different than it was 25 years ago.
I will maybe add two short comments. And one important thing that we found out was working, and when we were mentioning that, that the donors speak to each other, it's very important. Because, in the situations where you don't know exactly in which direction to go and what should be done in the country, I think it's very important to find out a platform where, and it really doesn't matter if there were also people from the government, but also from the businesses and from the private foundations. But the message was clear, which came out of the meeting in Brussels, and then later on it was in Vienna. We are here, we can help you, and it's up to you to find the answer. and we came up with the answer. But that was a message that came up from a group of people who believed in the country. And that is a second comment to the Belarus. There has to be a group of people who believe in the country. If you are in 5-year prison serving your term, if there is a single person out there who believes that it makes sense, it is tremendous help. And that is something what is very important, that there are others who care about you. And that is part of even there are not the answers there on the table, that is an important piece which needs to be part of the help.
I guess one thing that I would say, and that is that it also, from the funder point of view and from the program officer point of view, it's very important to use the expertise and the experience of people like Roger and others that have done this, because the expectations that people are going to be able to handle their own affairs as burgeoning young opposition figures. And when you see what's going on in Libya, for instance, where it's already splintering and people are murdering each other and whatever have you, it's having people that on the funder side who are go out there and see it for themselves and meet people and constantly come back and then call upon the people who have worked with those people and who can be trustworthy and who can't be trustworthy, because it's a very confusing point of view. And I remember, Lenka, you and I did a thing for AID in which we did a survey of the NGOs in Slovakia, and there were something like 900 had been registered, or 1,500 had been registered, and this is supposedly the great nonprofit sector of Slovakia, but in fact we could only find about 223 of them or something, and the others had just registered because it was easy to register. So it's stick-to-itiveness and being there and understanding the lay of the land over and over again, and not we always triangulate every single human being we dealt with. Because the first person that you talked to would say, well, they killed their mother yesterday, and the other one said, well, they stole my wallet the day before. I mean, in burgeoning society, and a new society that's been under an autocratic sort of lid, people do not trust each other. It's just the nature of what goes on. And therefore, we as Americans, and volunteers in the Peace Corps do this all the time, stick it out. Go back all the time. William Moody must have been there 25 times a year, going back and forth, talking to people, encouraging people, telling them you can do it. And he was probably, leaving present company aside, probably the best private foundation program officer I've ever known because of his belief in the people. And willing to stay up, and travel, and do all those kinds of things and not sit in an office.
Wonderful. Ambassador.
Well, thank you so much for a great panel. I think that we can all agree that Slovakia has been a remarkable success story in developing civil society, and particularly in transferring this expertise to other countries. And I want to point out that this is not only a matter for the NGOs to be active in the Western Balkans and Moldova, but the Ministry of Foreign Affairs itself is taking a very active role and takes that role very seriously. But the question I wanted to ask is that there continues to be a significant deficit in civil society in Slovakia with respect to the judiciary. And this is something that NGOs community agrees with, and the government understands this and is trying to work with it. But because of the very independence of the judiciary, it's a very difficult issue. And so I wonder if any of you have any strategies on addressing that issue that you could have had any experience with or could recommend.
Todd, what would you say is the deficit? It's
corruption, gangsterism. 90% of the companies in Slovakia do not have the confidence that the judiciary will give them a fair shake. And this is a survey that was just conducted.
Philip?
And so, but the problem is that the judiciary is.
As the only Slovak.
The problem is that these, this is civil society development. As with our country, the judiciary was set up as an independent branch of government, which it is in our country, and it should be in any country. So there's a lack of accountability. So what do you do? This is partly a legacy issue from the old times, and it's a serious issue.
I can say one quick point on that, Ambassador, which is
You
that
have a
You already
microphone.
have a mic, yeah.
You may clash.
although 2 mics is never a bad thing.
Exactly.
Take as many as you can get. But as part of the strategic dialogue with civil society, we have created a working group on governance and accountability, which is focused precisely on the issues you mentioned, that's headed by our Undersecretary of State for Economic Affairs, Robert Hormats. And we are bringing together, as part of that working group, civil society organizations from around the world, but frankly, we have a special focus on Central and Eastern Europe in this regard, that are operating in this sphere and that have concrete ideas on what we can do together and what governments in the region can do to address this challenge, because obviously it's not an issue that is unique to any country in the region. This is something that unfortunately is all too common. And we recognize that there is an opportunity for civil society to play a role as a watchdog in that space that cannot be replicated by any other actor in some instances, specifically because of the independent nature of judicial organizations. And so we feel that that at least provides us with a first step in this regard. I would also mention that we have a very good partner in the region, and in addition to yourself, Ambassador Norm Eisen in the Czech Republic is the former head of one of our leading accountability and transparency civil society organizations in the United States, and was for some time the top official responsible for ethics in the Obama White House. And as a result of that, he has made this one of the key priorities of his tenure, and is working to bring together partners from civil society throughout the region who have an interest in these issues. And I hope we'll be able to do some good work together in that regard.
Thank you very much. You almost named all the, I mean, it's not an easy answer on this, but one thing which needs to be set clear, and this may be maybe tough, but we did it too early. I mean, there was no enough energy and wisdom put into the change, and basically the system stayed as it was. I mean, maybe some structural changes happened, but in terms of who is doing it, most of the judges are the same. And you know, you just brought what you got before to today's, they are, you know, how they're deciding today. But the answer to is, for me, it's really the civil society efforts which are happening in the country, and you are, I'm sure, aware of it. There's the Alliance Fair Play, who goes like a watchdog after each case and just publicize it, and people are speaking about this, and this is becoming a topic of discussion, and it is really changing. It is changing, you know, the judges, it's changing the society, how they see it. And, you know, to be really frank with you, I mean, it's 20 years. I mean, we are just adolescent age. I mean, it's just changing. And that is something what I think it's, once I was on the panel, and it was, I think it was a great example, like democracy, or this, you know, the changes happening, it's like a marriage. You cannot expect that tomorrow it will be, you know, at the beginning you believe, you know, next week we love each other, it's great, and there will be no difficulties at all. The more you go and invest into it, the deeper you go in the relationship. And the same is with the democratic changes. I don't think so it can happen overnight. It cannot happen in 10 years. It cannot happen in 20. It's an ongoing job that is happening in the country. And we are now in the 20-year period. And the biggest challenge is now the judicial system. But, you know, there will be other challenges coming up, and we just have to respond to them. And kind of, I really truly believe that the civil society is the answer that can really cure these kind of difficulties that will be coming. I don't know what will be the next one, but they will be coming. And we just have to play the game, and we want to play the game. And that is something what needs to come across also to the, you know, now in the Egypt, I really sense that, you know, the expectations are so high, and my feeling was, guys, this will go so bad. It will go even worse. But you just have to be ready for the day when they start to believe, okay, it's really bad, but there is a way out, and you have to stand right there next to them, because that is the moment when actual changes are starting to happen, not when you are just kind of in the excitement mood of everything is great, pink, and wonderful. I mean, that is not the moment. The moment comes after. I think that is a part of the game.
I would go back to the carrot and stick part of it. We created the Via Award, Via Bona Award, in order to reward philanthropy in corporations in both the Czech Republic and Slovakia that was funded by Citibank. Is it still funded by Citibank? No. You raise it locally. But this rewards good guys and gives them recognition and gets the press to start to write about it, because it usually, it's become a very big thing. I know that Pontis has put together a CEO group, so there's peer pressure among some of the others. I don't know what role ABA Sealy is playing anymore, and Mark Ellis is the head of the International Law Association in London, but it may be interesting to bring in some very major figures. I mean, even a member of our Supreme Court like Anthony Kennedy or somebody like that, to come in and talk about the role that, that our legal system plays in the success of our corporations. And in the early days, I used to say to the people that were complaining about corruption and bribery and whatever have you, and I say, the money isn't coming from inside these countries. The money was coming from signing bonuses, from hotel chains that were trying to get property next to Charles Bridge. I mean, the point is that it isn't, you can't, one has to say to the companies that are being accused of being non-transparent and of bribery, that one understands that this is a system that's breaking down in other countries because, and then I'm talking about the Four Seasons and Ritz-Carlton. They were willing in Prague to pay more than the annual salary of every city council member if that hotel chain or that hotel chain got that piece of property next to Charles Bridge. That was not money. In the old days, Germany could deduct bribery as a business expense. Mm-hmm. So it was really important for, at least in the companies that we were working with, and U.S. Steel can play a very big role of this in Slovakia, to say, listen, people are corrupt, but it's good business if you do the following things. And that positive reinforcement, I think, has been somewhat helpful. I mean, it certainly hasn't changed the atmosphere that much, but there's hope at the end of the tunnel.
Okay. Unfortunately, I'm looking at my watch and realizing we got a little bit of a late start, but I think we're going to have to end this. We've got some snacks there, and then we have a second panel. I just want to quickly wrap up with some of the major themes that came through, and I just really want to thank all of you for your tremendous experience and your commitment to Slovakia and to the nascent democracies of the world, for all that you bring to their growth and development. A few things that we heard about, I mean, we talked about the importance of creating an architecture for successful engagement with civil society. We talked about some of the strategies that are working that the U.S. government is investing in, including using strategic dialogues with civil society, a tool that they've used primarily bilaterally and applying it now to groups of civil society from 30 nations around the world. We talked about working through multilateral organizations, a community of democracies as a platform to support some of these nascent movements. We talked about, Philippe talked about the importance of Peace Corps as a role model in Slovakia, and how the volunteers were able to show by being there the importance of volunteerism and public service, and how by putting your feet in and just being with the people, you're able to work proactively to support their movements. You also talked about the importance of the transition of the security forces and their role in security and power, and also in applying your new work with Egypt in working with the international NGOs in helping, and especially those that have had experience in Slovakia and other countries in Central Europe, to be able to help the Egyptians think through the process and to understand that it is a process and that it will take some time. You also pointed to the important role of young people. And the Velvet Revolution was really one of the first times when young people really were at the forefront of democracy. And of course, we saw this very much in the North Africa freedom movements. We learned about the National Endowment for Democracy. I was interested in hearing a little bit about that history. You talked about the model, the network, and the success story, and the revolution, again, emphasizing the revolutionary power of youth and using available technologies, the technologies of the time. We talked about Rock the Vote and using MTV. Now we talk about new social media, but youth is really being at the forefront of the movement now and finding their voice. We talked about how important it was to this transnational network of bringing together other nations that had experienced reform and working together and providing an experience space and a mentoring network for new democracies, and how important that is today in Egypt and Tunisia and elsewhere. And we had a fabulous walk through history, Wendy, with your description of the early dangerous days of the dissidents and bringing the artists and what have you, the authors. And the three lessons you offered to us were the trust, how important trust is, especially in movements that are emerging from a very authoritarian and even dangerous times. Trust is just vital to being able to move forward. And you talked about how important it is to invest in local people, the fact that they can do it, give them the confidence, the importance of mentoring. And you talked also about, again, you talked about the importance of Rock the Vote and the importance of Peace Corps and other groups involving youth in mentoring and giving them the confidence to stand up and find their voice. And then you said failure is okay. It's important to learn from our mistakes, and we all have mistakes, and we often learn more from them than we do from our successes. So that was a very important lesson as well. And then in our discussion, we talked a little bit more about the role of new media and leveling the playing field. We talked about the importance of donors speaking to each other, and the importance of the fact that the government of Slovakia is now becoming important mentors to other governments. We talked primarily about civil society here, but you brought up the important point that the government is also very much involved in nurturing new democracies. And then we talked about the importance of civil society as a watchdog and the importance of transformation in the judicial system, as well as in the legislative and executive branches. So it was an incredibly rich discussion. I want to thank all of our panelists for their incredible insight and their commitment.